Welcome to Raw Talent, a podcast from Shore Capital Partners focused on the real work of developing people and building stronger organizations. In this series, members of our talent development team have candid conversations about what it really takes to grow leaders and strengthen teams. Talent development is not just a program. It's the everyday work of coaching, feedback, stretch opportunities, and accountability that shapes performance over time. Each episode explores the real challenges companies face when developing people and the lessons learned along the way. All right, welcome back to Raw Talent. This is episode 4, talent strategy versus reactive staffing and hiring. And this is really the work of this episode is helping this season transition from really diagnosing individual people problems to taking a step back and asking whether or not the organization has a talent strategy at all. And the reality is that if you don't have a talent strategy, then every single hiring decision that you make feels urgent, it feels personal, and it feels reactive. And so I would love in this episode if what we talk about includes not only just what talent strategy is, but who owns it, where it lives, and then whether or not our org design matches what that strategy is.
Okay.
Let's start with that first one. How do you know if you have a talent strategy or if you're just reactive?
I don't think it would be any different than, like core components of any kind of strategy. So a North Star, like where are you going? What do you need to achieve? What are the 4 or 5 big goals that help you get there? And then what's the measurement? There's of course action plans that support that. And then what's the measurement that you're going to have in place in order to deliver that? I think in the case of talent strategy, it doesn't exist in and of itself. It exists to support the broader business strategy. So that connection, of course, has to be there as well.
Yeah, which also means, I think, in the context of your kind of framing around it being reactive, it also means that you're thinking proactively about how you cultivate a pipeline, what your talent needs are going to be in 18 months that are different from today. It's just applying the same thinking you do to your customers or your organic growth or to your acquisition to the people who need to be in seat to build the company you're trying to build. So I agree with you. It's not like rethinking anything. It's applying the same thing that most leaders listening to this apply to their business, but saying, okay, well, what does that mean for our people?
When I think about talent strategy and where it goes, yes, it mimics another strategy inside of the business. But really, I also see it as the core components being attracting, retaining, and engaging across those kind of talent
Sure.
groups. And I think what makes our context and the companies we work with so unique is that you're working with 2 groups. You're working with the people that you select, and you're working with the people that you inherit. And really having to make sure that your strategy addresses both of those things.
And by inherit, you mean they've come through acquisition. Somebody else hired them. We've acquired a great company, and these are the people.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that your talent strategies focus on those 3 prongs and both of those groups of people?
I think in most of our companies, you inherit more than you hire.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So a few of the things that I've talked to some of our platform companies about are actually newly formed platform companies, or how do I get to continue to have the company and the culture that I'm enjoying with the people that I have? What if we acquire another company and they're not like us? They don't like our values. They don't like what we do or how we do things. And which I think is a great question, and it's a understandable fear that people would have. So I think it's important for us to think about who are we acquiring, and I know that our teams do that. And that's really important. And not just from the financial aspects of it, but from the people aspects of it. Is there going to be a real clash of cultures? Oftentimes, and I've done this before with the different companies we have, is you do the values gap analysis, and people may describe their values differently, but if you really peel back the onion, they're kind of quite similar. So I think between being intentional about how you're selecting and how you're vetting those acquisitions, you help address that piece. Then it shifts to, now how are we engaging them?
And to be clear, what we're saying is that these conversations around people in the acquisition process is like the human capital diligence process.
It is. It's the human capital diligence process. I think it is bespoke depending upon the deal partner.
It's knowing who you're bringing in and having a sense of what they're good at in their particular business. Because the other part of this narrative is it's hard to go find talent, recruit talent at the speed that we're growing and evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And so for most of our companies, it's in our best interest to be able to build from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of your talent strategy from the diligence process, I mean, from that point on through is like, who's on this team that could be our next multi-site manager, or who's on this team who's such a subject matter expert that they could become this, or who's on like that. That's the strategic thinking. And that may seem obvious, but the alternative is you just inherit a team. And you've talked to the founder or whoever's involved in the selling process, but you don't really know who you've got. So how do you engage? How do you possibly engage at that level? That's why so many of our companies that do this well get in early, and the deal team members with the founder go sit with the people. They, whether it's a town hall, that makes it sound big, but these are small companies. A town hall with 8 people in it, they go and they have those conversations, and they sit in front of them. And they answer the questions that these people have about Shore. They answer the questions about what it looks like to become a part of a platform. Be honest about what is going to change, what isn't going to change, and those kinds of things. Because I just think in this environment, if you don't start with that level of transparency, your people strategy is already off to a difficult start in this kind of acquisition-driven growth environment.
And as you're building your strategy, the business strategy, the questions of what needs to be true in order for us to deliver this, and then what skills need to exist in the organization in order to make that happen. So many of the companies don't have fully built out anything, probably, but really from like a sales perspective, or probably mostly from a sales perspective, and we're going to grow. So how do we accelerate the skills and competencies that we need in order to deliver the strategy? And that is, to me, that is one of the components of your talent strategy. It is, how are you delivering against key competencies that you may be absent of, is one of the pieces.
And I think part of that, I love just the simple question of what needs to be true. You're sitting there and you've got an initial platform, we'll say it's $10 million kind of early stage or whatever, initial platform stage, or $5 million, whatever it might be. Well, what needs to be true for us to be $30 million and having acquired 5 more? That is a strategic question. It's just we need to apply that. What needs to be true of our account managers? What needs to be true of our sales team? What needs to be true of our finance team? And that question starts to help you see, well, if that's the case, then I see this person who came through the acquisition definitely being able to step up there. But over here, where if IT needs to look like this to be at $30 million, I'm not sure we have that. And so it's almost like a gap analysis, going back again of what needs to be true, and then looking at what you have, and then evaluating, going back to the whole premise of this particular series. Who can we develop?
Exactly. Yep.
Who do we need to top grade where they're good where they are, but they're probably not going to go to the next level thing. We're not going to mess with them. They're succeeding. They're happy in their role. And then who's just not going to survive getting to $30 million? Yeah. It's the very premise of this conversation.
And then you have to have that conversation every quarter.
Yes.
Because it changes. And I think that's part of the reason people don't do the strategy, because it feels like this really big thing that you do once a year. And we know the reality is there's not enough certainty in the next 6 months for us to be able to make firm decisions. So you have a direction. And I think that is one of the mindset shifts that you have to overcome. Is it is a direction that you're going, so you know if you're veering off course.
I'll give you an example of why having it that frequently is important. So working with a leader at one company right now, just doing some ongoing conversations. They're in a situation where they're growing, and position called, I believe is called account manager. And historically, in the size of the business, that account manager role has largely been a transaction between customer need, transaction to product or customer service people, but largely was an intermediary. And as the company has grown, customers have started to ask, why can't this person just answer my question? Why do I always have to be
Oh,
passed through to this? Because these are not customers that have been long-term relationship things. It just feels like a clunky extra step.
mhm.
Well, that's the customer telling you your strategies behind. And what they're in the process of doing is like now strategically thinking like, okay, what needs to be true for this company now at this stage for the account manager role? And in this case, the account managers that they need going forward need to be more than transactions. They need to have a mastery of the product and service they're selling so that they can answer questions and only escalate or only pass off in certain situations because their current customer base is expecting that. So in all of our companies, as you grow, again, the account manager at $5 million is likely different than the account manager at $15 million or $30 million. And even if it's the same size, you're paying attention to what your customers are asking for. You're getting customer feedback. And customers are saying, I don't know why I have to go through this. And then when I go through this, and then I put in a ticket for that, and then I have to wait for that. This seems really inefficient. Totally normal. But it's why in a rapid growth, you have to keep evaluating, particularly maybe not every role,
Mhm.
but those
Yeah.
critical roles to say, is this still what we need? Is what we had described as an account manager what we need today? And will it be what we need in 6 months or 12 months? And just keep asking that
Yeah.
question.
I think that I'm really glad you said that around like maybe not every role, but this particular role. I think that is a mistake that we make, or mistake is not a great word, but um, we tend to think when we're talking about HR stuff that it's for everybody, and we lose the impact when we make it that broad. Another concept that is widely held. So let's apply this to HR. And I've had conversations with companies around. We talk about turnover. Turnover is horrible. Well, where is it most horrible? And where does it really have an impact on the business? And then how do we fix it for that segment of the population? So I think the strategy is also about being pretty discreet about what you're going to do and where you're going to do it in order to have an impact.
I just want to make explicit here something that we're talking about, which is we're looking at customer satisfaction, retention data,
Yeah.
a role,
Yeah.
making decisions about a role based off of customer data,
Mm-hmm.
which goes back to everything we just talked about. Literally
Yeah.
informed talent decision
Yeah.
based off of metrics that don't always show up on a dashboard
Mhm.
and don't always show up on a business dashboard aligned with these other metrics. And what we're talking about is a critical fundamental shift that needs to happen at this company that wouldn't be happening if they weren't aligning and thinking about our customers are telling this is what the
Mm-hmm.
job description says, we have to evolve.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
To their credit, they've recognized it and they're responding in proper form. Like as rapidly as we change, you're rarely going to be ahead of that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe prospectively, but if you can pay attention to it and not you start to diagnose the NPS scores have dipped just a little bit. And there's this pattern of these comments that it just seems to take one extra step, or it seems to, and I don't know who I'm supposed to actually talk to. And if you see those patterns, then you're saying, okay, is there something, going back to our diagnostic, is there something we have missed,
Mm-hmm.
not in that particular performer, but in how we've defined this role?
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about what a talent strategy should include and how we think about it. But what's being highlighted is there are some misses that happen and some missteps. So at the end of the day, if we're not hiring an HR person necessarily early
Mm-hmm.
in the hold,
Mm-hmm.
who owns this?
Mm-hmm.
Because like who owns this should then inform how to make sure that it is showing up, how this strategy is taking place. So break that down. Who should own this early? How should we transition it to someone else as the business evolves?
That is a really good question. I will tell you, you do not have to hire an HR leader in order to have a talent strategy.
No.
So
That's an important, I don't want to gloss over that. That's an important message,
Yeah.
right? Like, yeah, that's a really important message.
and it's great, as we've talked about before, the skills that are required, skills and competencies required in order to develop and execute a strategy are functionally agnostic. So I think anyone on the leadership team can do that.
Mhm.
And it probably comes down to who has the interest to do it, who maybe has the bandwidth to do it, and maybe just who has the passion to do it. And I certainly hope there is one person on that leadership team who can do that.
What I'm hearing you say is that somebody has to own it. If it's assumed that it lives everywhere, then it's going to live nowhere.
Yes, I think someone has to own it. Someone has to be the call them the project manager of it, but does include everyone. So there's, somebody who is holding the scorecard that says, did we do what we said we were going to do? And how is it impacting other metrics on our scorecard?
All of our new companies in the first 6 to 9 months do an initial strategic planning session.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be part of that conversation, whether there's an HR person present or not. Because again, to the whole premise that we started this series with, you can't let your company outgrow your people or you get yourself in deep trouble. Well, you've just laid out a growth plan for your company. Then you need to have the conversation about, for this growth plan to be true.
True. Yeah, exactly.
So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about whether or not org design matches the stage of the business, because we know from the companies that we work with that stage relevance does matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think I want to dig into the nuance a bit around whether or not a business needs the same talent profile in every role. And to be clear, what I mean by talent profile here is
Yeah.
like in the 9 box kind of like
Oh.
framework for me is
Mm-hmm.
like not every role necessarily needs high potential, high performance.
Mm-hmm.
How do you discern which role needs which, and how does the stage inform that decision?
I'm going to kick that very difficult question to Cynthia because that's her area of expertise.
Which role needs which? Well, I will go on record as saying I don't think the goal, just practically speaking, is to have every role in the 9 box. If you're functioning well as a team, you don't need every role in there to be successful. And some might argue that could cause actually some challenges. I do think different phases of the hold period may suggest which of the functions are most important to be in that role. Early on, one would certainly, throughout the whole period, probably you're going to say the CFO and probably the CEO are the two that you want there. I think the others are dependent upon your business strategy and how those individual players move across the leadership team and the function. So I think I would say that's a pretty good estimate.
I think the bias toward everybody being at the top of the 9 box kind of thing is normal and natural, but like it comes back to something that we've talked about previously, and that's clarity and expectations of what a good performer is in a given role at a given stage of the company. There are really great controllers in a company that may never be a good CFO, but you don't want to let them go for anything at a certain stage of the company. You just have to recognize like you're going to have to hire above them to find your CFO as an example. And to me, that's like, it's okay to have that person who is so good at that. It's just not okay to, this goes back to strategy, misalign them with the stage of the company and the current strategy of the company. And that is the kind of case in point of where the desire and the efficiency of being able to hire internally meets the stress of the kind of growth that our companies go through.
To that point, though, I think this would be the last kind of question before we transition out. We've talked a bit about the business that you're building and where you're going, being a part of your talent strategy, and how the business maybe that you're building now in year 3 is different than the business that you were at launch. And therefore, the level of talent, the roles, the structure that you need is vastly different. What's some advice that you would give a leader who is tasked with talent strategy to think about when to look outward and bring in new roles versus, or new folks,
New folks,
versus making a commitment early in some of those that needed institutional knowledge, especially at a launch? Like, how should one think about that distinction when we know that the business in year 1 is vastly different than year 2 and year 2.5 and year 3?
I have kind of a messy answer, and then let Cynthia give a good answer. I go back, as I listen to you ask that question, to something we said in one of the earlier episodes. Difficult conversations get more difficult the less you have them. Feedback gets more sort of breaking the longer it lasts without being offered. I would offer a similar pattern in this, if you make growth and development a part of what you do as a team, then the clarity of that decision about when you need to hire over someone is less grueling and less surprising to anyone. If all that's ever happened, I'll use the same example I had before, is I've gotten praise, which I never would, at being a fantastic controller, and what a master I am at getting the books closed on time, efficient, communicating, all those kinds of things. And that's all I ever know about my work. Then when you hire a CFO on top of me, I'm looking going, well, I thought I was the next person up for this role. If I know that as a outstanding controller, I've sat down with my manager, my CEO, or whoever, talked about where I want to go as a career. And we've talked about, you're doing great here, but to do this, you've got to learn to lead people. You got to learn. And I've had some of that context. I may be disappointed, but it's not surprising. So to me, like, my messy answer to that question is, if development and growth is a part of what we do, then that just becomes an easier answer for everybody. She probably has a better answer than that.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I would add that building that into your culture, like how you talk about things, the work that you do, your quarterly reviews, in your performance review, or at some time in the year, do you actually have a career conversation? What do you think about what you're doing? Do you like it? What do you want to do next? And someone says, I love what I'm doing right now, and I could do this for a long time. That is such valuable information to have, because then you're like, great, now I can move on to something else that I need to work with. And that will, that changes, people change. But I think what I'm actually learning as we're having these conversations is just the continual communication and feedback loop that needs to happen, and that you want to feed your database of information that directs your strategy is pretty and key.
At least in my own experience, we often take this approach that it's our decision to make as a leader or manager about whether or not someone stays or goes and moves. But providing ongoing conversation gives you the opportunity to allow people to opt in and opt out themselves.
Yeah.
It's much better to know, no, I'm good where I am. Then I don't have to waste any mental energy as a manager being like, I wonder if Cynthia would want to be.
Exactly. How is she going to get there?
I really want to be doing the best in the other person.
Exactly.
That is maybe a little lower. But
I'm good, Jackson.
Yeah, right. So that's helpful. Right, so what I'm taking away from this really is the idea that talent strategy is significantly more than just a hiring plan. It really is about how you attract, retain, and engage, and in particular that engage part that we just finished up with, around this ongoing conversation. And that if there isn't a clear owner, that ownership is fuzzy, and it's likely not happening, and that it's a misstep if we wait for HR to be the one that steps in to do that, especially early, and that stage relevance matters. And so as we kind of wrap this episode and move into episode 5, what we're going to talk about is pressure testing this in a high growth environment. So what happens when growth, acquisition, integration really starts to test your talent strategy and reveals that maybe the talent strategy is no longer aligned with the business strategy? How do you know, and what do you do about it?
Sounds fun.
Alrighty.
If you enjoyed this episode, check out other Raw Talent episodes at www.shorecp.university/podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts. Here you will find our Bigger, Stronger, Faster, Microcap Moments, and Everyday Heroes series, each highlighting the people and stories that make investing in the lower middle market unique. This podcast was narrated by Jackson Sprayberry, created and produced by Austin Johnson, editing by Podhouse Productions. This podcast is the property of Shore Capital Partners, LLC. None of the content herein is investment advice, an offer of investment advisory services, nor a recommendation or offer relating to any security. See the Terms of Use page on the Shore Capital website for other important information.